constantly on the move in Beijing since Saturday night's bloodbath in Tiananmen Square, but today saw the largest numbers ever of men and vehicles taking up combat positions around their Tiananmen stronghold. As dawn broke, a huge convoy fanned out east of the square, while another 2,000 unarmed soldiers, distinguished as members of the 27th Unit by the makeshift red bands on their arms, marched along the capital's ironically named Avenue of Eternal Peace. The sheer size of the military presence is fueling rumours that they are not arming themselves against the people, but rather rival military units. As some troops march through diplomatic and residential areas, they continue to open fire sporadically and not always firing in the air. One Australian resident told of having to take cover with a group of women and children while the sound of shooting rang out all around them.
We didn't have the chance to have a look. We tried to hide behind the high buildings, but we were told the troops are shooting each other.
What sort of gunfire?
Well, it sounds like all the automatic rifles and even machine guns.
Another, a Fijian student, spoke of the friends he lost in Saturday's massacre.
I have three very good friends, Chinese guys who would normally trade with me back at the schools. I lost them.
This morning, tanks and soldiers swarmed on the diplomatic residential compound and riddled it with gunfire before taking away a man. It's not known if he was Chinese, but the compound is normally off-limits to local nationals. Troops are still believed to be conducting a search of that compound, claiming a sniper shot one of their men. Relations between the Chinese authorities and the diplomatic communities have been soured with the news that a number of leading student agitators are hiding out in foreign embassies. And America's blatant harbouring of prominent dissident Feng Liji in its embassy has brought the wrath of the Beijing authorities down on them, who see it as unwarranted interference in the country's internal affairs. The disciplinary committee of the Chinese Communist Party has warned that members who take part in the current unrest will be expelled. The warning was issued after the head of the committee, Zhao Shi, appeared to have taken over the duty of the party chief, Zhao Ziyang. Meanwhile, China's central television has screened a documentary on what it called anti-revolutionary riots. The documentary did not say where or when the film was shot, but says it was a record on the anti-revolutionary riots since the 3rd of this month. Most of the film centred on an area where a number of armoured cars and military vehicles were apparently abandoned by troops. The documentary, filmed by martial law authorities and narrated by one of its staff, says criminals beat up and kidnapped troops, attacked the Great Hall of the People and the Communist Party headquarters as they seized weapons. The film shows army vehicles being burnt and says soldiers were burnt alive. It also says that troops had exerted great restraint and retreated. The documentary says altogether some 60 vehicles were destroyed and an untold number of soldiers wounded or killed. Tonight's documentary came 2 days after Western news agencies reported that troops not loyal to President Yang Chang-kun abandoned their weapons and military vehicles rather than enforce martial law. The Hong Kong government says it believes certain groups are circulating malicious rumours with the aim of stirring up unrest in the colony. But the police are on the full alert for possible trouble. The remarks came after police had to use tear gas to disperse demonstrators in Mong Kok early yesterday. The security branch claimed this afternoon that such reports are probably just malicious rumours, spread by people intent on stirring up the emotional cauldron Hong Kong is now in. The Principal Assistant Secretary for Security, Kim Salkeld, said the department had been receiving phone calls and fax messages all day, supposedly from police stations, reporting violent clashes around the territory. But he said the government knew all protest demonstrations held today had been small and peaceful.
There have been groups of marchers going to the NCNA throughout the day, presenting petitions, placing wreaths there. Again, there has been no disorderly conduct whatsoever. The reports that have been coming through, occasionally by phone or by fax, about incidents in Causeway Bay, Wan Chai Central, Tsim Sha Tsui, these are unfounded. There is nothing like that happening.
However, Mr. Salkeld added that the government was taking no chances and police stations were on full alert for trouble. He blamed last night's riot scenes in Mong Kok on criminal gangs taking advantage of the situation. The governor, Sir David Wilson, who had to postpone his trip to Britain because of developments in China and Hong Kong, left this evening for London. He's due to meet the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary.
One of the things that I want to do, one of the things I want to say is that this is a difficult time in Hong Kong, and it's a time when I think we need to have support from Britain. And one of the issues I want to talk about is the question of nationality, but it's also a question of having general support in a difficult time. I'm sure myself that Hong Kong is capable of getting through a difficult time, but nevertheless I think we need to have also support from London to help us get through.
Finally, the weather. It should be fine and hot tomorrow, with the temperature reaching a high of 32 degrees.
Japan has also joined the United States and other nations in urging their people to leave China. Protests are growing in Japan because of the Chinese government's action against pro-democracy students. And thousands of angry depositors in Singapore are withdrawing their money from Chinese banks. There is other world reaction. In Hong Kong, thousands of residents have donned black armbands as a one-day strike turned into a day of mourning in the British colony for victims of the Beijing bloodshed. Of course, we're going to keep you updated on the events of China here on CNN. And we'll be returning to Sonia in Los Angeles.
An angry mob of, I guess, 500 or 600 people with 2x4s and karate punches and all of that. I really didn't think about it. I just dived into the crowd and pulled this man out of the crowd, and sustaining a few hits myself, but managed to drag him into the hotel. He was unconscious at the time. And then I sat and I stood in front of the crowd and I said, nobody's getting this man without going through me.
Now, Ralph, you jumped into a situation. Did you have any idea who he was? Who did he turn out to be?
I had no idea.
Well, who was he, and why were they doing this?
We heard somebody say that he was a spy. It turned out that he was an undercover security agent, but as far as I was concerned, I couldn't stand by and let anybody get killed as long as I could prevent it. And I think if they're talking about democracy, I think due process should certainly be one of the elements that's included in that.
Kevin, is it true that the government put people in the crowd to instigate violence so that there might be an excuse to turn against the students?
We heard reports to that effect. In fact, I think the situation outside our hotel that Ralph just described might have been an example of that. He might have been an agent provocateur. I wouldn't say that that was the case in the square itself. There, the Army didn't need any pretext or any provocation. Their orders were to clear out the square, and they clearly went to the square with intentions of using force, and they just trampled over the tents and crushed people and shot people indiscriminately. But in other parts of the city around the hotels, they might have used agent provocateurs for sure.
Kevin, I want to make sure that we understand clearly what occurred, and since you were there, you can tell us. Is it true that the students were totally restrained, that they showed passive resistance, but that they were, in fact, nonviolent?
The students in the square were totally restrained. It was a peaceful demonstration, and they were nonviolent. The attacks were totally unprovoked. Now, there was other resistance throughout the city. Once the Army moved and began their barbarism and the massacres, the people fought back valiantly with whatever weapons that they could construct. This was not a passive, vanquished, demoralized people. They were angry and fighting, and the soldiers took some heavy casualties.
So you're talking about the fact that their fighting began in terms of self-defense as opposed to being offensive.
Exactly, absolutely.
Ralph, we've been told that some students have been picked up and held in custody, that other students are attempting to hide so that it won't happen to them. Is there truth to that report?
Absolutely. There's several of the student leaders are in hiding. There were some that were in various hotels that we knew about. And there's lots of students that are missing. They've now discovered bodies floating in